The sun was bleeding its last colors over the dry bones of the prairie, spilling crimson and gold across the rooftops of a tired town, too old to pretend anymore. Horses snorted low in their stalls. Somewhere, a baby cried. Somewhere else, a bottle smashed against a wall, and on the edge of it all, where the road turned to dust and dignity, stood a girl. She was young, 16. Perhaps, but already ancient in the way pain makes a soul fold in on itself. Her dress was thin, cotton once white, but now the color of grief. Her shoes didn't match, one of them too big. Her hands were bound loosely with twine, not tight enough to cut the skin, but firm enough to say, "You don't belong to yourself today." She stood on display beside a mule cart, as if waiting for someone to claim a lost parcel. A man spat tobacco near her feet and said she was deaf. Said she hadn't spoken in years. Said it like that made her less human and more product. Inside the saloon, her father shouted through whiskey-slick lips, negotiating her future for the price of his next bottle. No one spoke for her, not even her. People passed her like she was invisible. One child reached out to touch her arm and was pulled back sharply by his mother. "Don't look," she whispered. But the child did. He saw something there, something carved deep beneath the silence. Then the swinging doors creaked open. He stepped out slowly, like he didn't want to startle the moment. A tall man, leather-worn and dust-creased, with a long shadow and a longer past. His hat sat low, casting shade over a face too tired to be young, too handsome to be broken. He didn't speak, just looked at the girl, then at her father, then back again. There was no haggling, no spectacle. He handed over a small pouch. The clink of coins was quiet, almost respectful. Her father snatched it greedily, laughing as if he'd sold an old saddle. Then he disappeared into the bar, already forgetting the shape of the girl's face. The man untied the twine from her wrists with careful hands. Rough from work, but gentle as rain. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just stood there. "You'll come with me," he said softly, not as a command, just an offering. She nodded once. They left the town without fanfare. No one stopped them, no one cared, or maybe they cared too much to admit it. The sky darkened as they rode. She sat side-saddle behind him, arms not wrapped around his waist, but resting at her sides. Her eyes never blinked. She watched the land roll past like a dream she didn't trust. He tried once, halfway through the ride, to ask her name. She looked at him, tilted her head, didn't answer. He didn't try again. There was something sacred in the silence, something that didn't need fixing. He began to wonder if she really couldn't hear, or if she simply didn't want to respond to the kind of world that had treated her like a debt. The ranch appeared like a memory, coming home low-slung and quiet, with fences crooked from weather, and walls faded by sun. A dog barked once, then stopped, sensing something different in the air. A woman stood on the porch, wide-hipped, gray-haired, with a face carved by time and healing. Her name was Miriam. She'd been the housekeeper, midwife, and cook for nearly 2 decades. Some said she had the hands of a healer and the heart of a hammer. She folded her arms and squinted. "You bringing home strays now?" she asked the man. He dismounted, helped the girl down. "She's not a stray," he said. Miriam's eyes softened a little. "She deaf. She's quiet. HMPH. They didn't ask more than that. Folks like them knew the difference between curiosity and kindness. A boy peeked out from the barn, a small one, no older than 11, skin sun-browned, eyes curious. Elijah, the stable hand, orphaned long ago, taken in with little fuss and even less explanation. He watched the girl like she was a ghost made of soft cloth and starlight. She watched him back, not afraid, not angry, just noticing. The girl was shown a room upstairs, clean sheets, a small window facing east. She sat on the bed but didn't lie down. She kept her boots on. Hands folded, Miriam left a basin and a nightdress. "If you need anything, knock once," she said, not expecting a response. Downstairs, the man poured a cup of coffee that tasted like regret. Miriam stirred stew in a pot and didn't ask questions. "She's got eyes like she's seen the end of the world," she murmured. He nodded. "But she followed you," Miriam added. "She didn't have anywhere else. Maybe not. But she chose where to step." Later that night, the girl sat on the porch, feet tucked beneath her, watching the moon rise over the prairie like a silent hymn. The man stepped outside, leaned against the post, and lit a match. He didn't smoke, just liked the way the flame cut through darkness. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him, and yet something passed between them, like two pages of the same book, remembering they once touched. She closed her eyes and tilted her face to the wind. It carried no words, but she heard something anyway. Mornings on the ranch came gently, like they'd been taught not to wake the sorrow sleeping in its rooms. The rooster crowed low, as if remembering there was a girl beneath the rafters now. The wind whistled softly through the cracks in the wood, and in the quiet, the girl rose from her narrow bed before the sun had cleared the hills. She did not wait for instructions. She carried the bucket to the well and pumped water without being told. She peeled potatoes with slow, steady care. She swept the porch before the dirt had a chance to settle. She moved through the world like someone who had always known what it meant to go unnoticed in, who had learned how to listen with more than ears. Elijah followed her like a shadow some days. He didn't ask questions, just mirrored her movements. She didn't smile, not quite, but the corner of her mouth sometimes bent like a blade of grass catching wind. She never spoke, never signed, but she answered in her own way. When the horses whinnied before feeding time, she was already in the stable. When the kettle boiled over, she lifted it from the stove before Miriam could. When the rancher muttered fence'll need mending, she fetched the nails without ever looking at his mouth. Miriam, for all her wisdom, narrowed her eyes. "She's reading lips," she told the man. "Smart girl. Smarter than most." "Maybe," he said, but he wasn't sure. It felt like something deeper, like she knew things before they happened. Or maybe just before anyone said them aloud. One morning, as he saddled his horse, he began to hum a low tune. Not a song exactly, just a habit his wife used to find comfort in. He wasn't thinking about it, but the girl stopped. Sweeping, she turned, looked at him, not sharply, not startled, just listening. She turned back slowly, as if she'd given herself away. That night, she sat outside again, bare feet resting on the porch rail. The stars blinked like shy promises overhead, and beneath her breath, so soft the wind almost swallowed it, she hummed the same tune back. He heard it, knew it wasn't imagination. Still, he said nothing, because saying something might scare it away. The days grew warmer. The fields breathed green again. The girl learned how to braid the horses' manes with strands of grass, how to move between the rows of beans without disturbing a single stem. Elijah asked her once, in a whisper, if she could really hear nothing. She only looked at him, eyes wide as the whole sky, and didn't answer. He didn't ask again. But sometimes, she'd hand him a tool before he reached for it. Sometimes, she'd step out of the way of footsteps that hadn't yet made sound. There was a tree beyond the barn, an old cottonwood, half dead but proud, and she often sat beneath it at dusk, her fingers tracing the bark like reading a secret written in wood. Miriam watched from the window. "She ain't deaf," she finally said one night as she peeled apples. "Or if she is, it ain't the kind of deaf a doctor can find." The man didn't respond. "Maybe she's hiding from something," Miriam continued. "Some folks stop talking because the world stopped listening." He stirred his coffee and stared into it like it might hold her story. "Don't matter to me," he said. "It should." "Why?" "Because it matters to her." One evening, After a long day fencing the southern pasture, he left a small box on the table outside her door. No note, no words. Inside, a music box, wooden worn, the kind children are given to hold when their mothers don't know how to soothe them. He didn't know why he gave it. Maybe to say something without saying it. She opened it slowly. The melody played, soft and broken from age. A lullaby long forgotten by everyone but the box. She didn't cry. She didn't smile, but she touched the key gently, played it again, and he knew she had heard it. Not just felt the vibrations through the wood. He knew still. She did not speak. Still, he did not ask. But something changed after that, when they worked the field. She glanced at him now and then, not out of fear, but as if to check whether he was still there, and he always was. When they passed in the kitchen, her shoulder brushed his just slightly, not by accident, Miriam noticed. Looks like spring's thaw in more than just the river, she murmured with a smirk. One night, the girl slipped outside and stood barefoot in the long grass. The moon shone silver, and the air was warm with silence. The man stood just behind her on the porch, not speaking, not moving. She raised her hands as if feeling the sky, then lowered them. She whispered, so quiet, it almost wasn't their words, not meant to be heard, but shared. I hear too much. He didn't speak, just stepped beside her and looked out across the land. I used to listen for danger, she continued, still facing forward. Steps on wood, the sound of glass, the way his belt sang through the air. He closed his eyes. I stopped hearing music, stopped hearing the birds. Didn't want to know what was coming, didn't want to feel it anymore. Then she turned to face him. First time she'd looked him in the eye without flinching. But you don't make sound that hurts. He swallowed, slow and thick. You can hear, he said. Not a question. She nodded, but I needed to forget how, for a while. He understood. Not with words, but with every part of himself that had once chosen silence over pain. He didn't ask her to explain, didn't ask her to perform her hearing like a miracle. He just nodded and sat beside her in the grass, where the night made no demands, by week's end. She spoke against a few words, softly shared with Miriam as they made bread. This salt's not right, she said, not realizing she'd said it aloud. Miriam blinked, stared. You just... The girl looked up, eyes wide, and for a moment seemed to shrink. But Miriam just smiled, wide and proud. Told you, she whispered. It was never your ears, sweetheart, just your heart. The man said nothing that night, just passed her the music box at dinner, and when she opened it again, the song wasn't lonely anymore. It sounded like it had a listener now, like it had been waiting for her. Ears all this time, and she let it play, all the way through. The days rolled on like dust across the plains, slow and steady, with little to mark them but the rising sun and the soft rhythm of work. On the ranch, things didn't happen in sudden ways. They bloomed. The girl, once brittle and voiceless, began to take root. She wore her hair in a loose braid now, tucked behind her ear, like she was beginning to trust the wind not to carry her away. She still didn't speak much, but the silence around her no longer felt like absence. It felt like choosing peace. One morning, a storm rolled in without warning. The sky turned to pewter, and thunder groaned like an old man waking from pain. Miriam rushed to bring the laundry down from the line. The man checked the barn doors, and Elijah, curious, quick, always one step, to brave, wandered toward the river that bordered the west pasture. No, one saw him slip, but the girl heard it. Not with her ears, with something older, the sound of the world, gasping in a way only danger makes. She was already running before anyone called his name. The rancher saw her bolt toward the trees, feet bare, hair flying like a banner. Miriam shouted after her, but it was no use. The girl had vanished into the wild. Rain fell like needles. The river roared louder now, drunk with storm. and then through the curtain of water, he saw her. She was waist-deep, clutching the boy to her chest, her body trembling not from fear, but from the cold truth of water trying to claim him. She pulled him out, held him, then, slowly, calmly, carried him back up the hill. By the time the rancher reached her, Elijah was coughing water and sobbing into her shoulder. The girl didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and breathed. And in that breath, he heard something break. Not in her, in him. That night, Elijah slept by the fire, wrapped in blankets. His fingers curled around the girl's sleeve like a promise not to wander again. Miriam made tea, poured 2 cups, sat beside the girl and spoke so softly it barely disturbed the air. "You heard him," she said. The girl nodded. Miriam sipped her tea. "You've been hearing all along, haven't you?" "I never stopped," the girl whispered. Then, after a long pause, "I just stopped wanting to." In the kitchen, with the lantern low and the stew forgotten, she told them the truth. Not in great speeches, just one memory at a time. Her father shouting, his belt snapping through air like a whip, the way his anger filled every corner of every room, louder than anything should be allowed. She learned, over time, to mute the world, to pretend, to pull away from sound, until even kindness couldn't reach her. "The worst part," she said, "was when I missed the birds. When I couldn't remember what a creek sounded like in spring." She looked at the rancher, then away. "I made myself deaf to survive. But now," she touched her chest, "I think I want to hear again." He nodded once, didn't reach for her, didn't speak over her, just saw her, like he always had. Over the next few weeks, something delicate unfolded between them. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was in the quietest places, the space between morning chores, the hush of dusk, the stillness just before sleep. He began to read her presence like scripture. Her steps in the kitchen meant the coffee would be hot. Her silence on the porch meant her thoughts were deep. Her glance over the table sometimes felt louder than thunder. One night, while they mended a fence in the pale blue twilight, she spoke his name. Just once, no fanfare, no music swelled, but the moment landed like a raindrop in dust, small, soft, but holy. He turned, not shocked, just moved, and said hers in return. Neither had spoken them aloud. Before, as if saving them, the ranch became something it hadn't been in years. Not just quiet, but alive in its quiet. The horses responded to her touch like she was part wind. Miriam began to sing again, while she cooked old songs that only made sense to women who had lived hard and loved harder. Even Elijah, who once talked too much, learned the art of listening. They were a house built on softness now, and the man, he became something else too. Not gentler, he had always been gentle beneath the weathered skin, but more open, like her silence had cracked something in him he didn't know needed light. He never spoke of his wife. Not in the early days, but one night, beside the fire, as the girl stitched a button on Elijah's coat, he said, "She would have liked you." The girl looked up. She used to braid her hair the same way. He added, voice a thread of memory. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. A week later, the girl stood at the edge of the field, eyes closed, face tilted to the wind. The man watched from the porch. She wasn't listening for danger anymore. She was listening for joy and the wind. Kind and curious Dash answered. In it, she heard the laughter of a boy not drowning, the crackling warmth of Miriam's bread rising, the steady heartbeat of the man who never once asked her to be different, and beneath all that, her own name, spoken finally, without fear. The days had grown kind. Even the wind, once sharp with loneliness, now moved softer through the cottonwoods. The girl no longer startled at the creak of porch boards or the slam of a barn door. She smiled sometimes, small and real, like the earth was slowly unfreezing beneath her ribs. And then he came back. It was mid-morning. The sun had just begun to stretch across the ridge. Miriam was kneading bread. Elijah was fixing the henhouse door. The girl was humming to herself beside the wash line, and from the ridge, riding sloppy and loud, came a shadow from the past her father. He hadn't changed, not where it mattered. His beard had gone more gray than black, but the drink still hung on him like a second skin. His eyes were wild, empty of sorrow, full of swagger. He rode straight up to the house like he belonged. "Where is she?" he barked, sliding off the saddle with a grunt. No one answered. Miriam stepped out first, wiping her hands on her apron. "I said, where's my girl?" "She's not yours," Miriam said, her voice low as storm clouds. The man laughed. "Says who? I got papers. She's mine by law." "She was yours by cruelty," came another voice from behind the corral. The rancher walked out slow, calm, one hand on his belt, the other resting easy at his side. The drunk's grin faltered. "You, the one bought her?" "I gave you coin." "Yes. Then I'm here to take her back." "No," the rancher said simply. "She ain't yours. She ain't yours either." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the girl's silence, soft and chosen. This was a silence heavy with years of swallowed screams. The girl stood at the edge of the porch, not hiding, not shaking. She looked at her father and didn't flinch. He looked at her, really looked in for a flicker of a second. Something like uncertainty passed across his face. She wasn't the girl he'd sold. She had grown into something he couldn't shame anymore. He stepped toward her. That's when the rancher moved. Not fast, not with anger, just enough. "Take one more step," he said, voice steady as winter oak, "and you'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt." The man stopped, then snarled, "She ain't nothing but a broken thing. She's more whole than you ever were." The father spat, tried to shove past, and from behind Elijah, with his small fists clenched and his heart beating bigger than his frame, hurled a stone that struck the drunk square in the shoulder. "Oh, damn brat." Then Miriam stepped forward, ladle still in hand. "You best get back on that mule before we teach you what a family looks like." The man looked round, the boy, at the woman, at the quiet rancher who didn't need a weapon to hold power, and then at her, and it hit him. He'd lost, not just ownership, but the story she had written herself, into a new one, and he didn't exist there. He cursed, loud, bitter, but no one flinched this time. He turned, climbed on his mule, and rode off into the dust, a man no longer feared, no longer fed, just forgotten. That evening, the porch was quiet. The girl sat with her legs tucked beneath her, her hair loose and wind-tossed. The rancher sat beside her, hat resting on his knee. Neither spoke. There was no need. Finally, she broke the hush. "I used to think I was ruined." He turned his head just slightly, waited, like something left out in the rain too long, molded, soft. He didn't argue, didn't rush to fill the space, but "I was never broken," she whispered. "Just buried." He nodded. "I think you knew that before I did." He looked at her fully, then, eyes like dusk, voice like soil. "You were always there, just needed quiet, long enough to grow." She reached for the music box in her lap, opened it. The tune began, delicate and slow. Then, softly, as the melody played, she turned to him. "My name," she said, voice trembling, "is." She said it, and it was beautiful. The sound of it filled the space like spring after a hard winter, like rain in a dry throat, like something sacred returned. He smiled, not with surprise, but with peace. "I know," he said. "I've known." They sat like that until the stars came out, until Elijah snored gently from inside, and Miriam sang lullabies to the sourdough rising in its bowl. The next morning, the birds sang louder than usual. The girl stood at the fence, arms folded, watching. The rancher saddled his horse. He looked up, raised an eyebrow. "Ride." She nodded. They didn't talk much that morning, just rode side by side into the wide prairie, where wind and sky blur together, where the land remembers. They reached the cottonwood tree, the one where she first dared to listen again. She touched the trunk, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the twine, the same one her father had bound her wrists with. She tied it around a low branch, loose as ribbon, then let the wind take it. "Goodbye," she said. The word didn't tremble, it soared that night. She sat beside the fire again. Elijah leaned against her, half asleep. Miriam hummed from the kitchen. The rancher leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the girl smile to herself. She looked up, eyes full of quiet joy. "I hear everything now," she said, "even the pain." She nodded. "Especially the pain. And it doesn't scare you?" She smiled. "No, because now I know the sound of my name." And then she whispered it again, soft, clear, free.